Well, howdy there. My name is Mike Wolfson. I'm a program director in the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, and I'm here to tell you about the Blueprint MedTech Incubator Hubs funding announcement, PAR 21314. So I hope you've all watched the overview presentation. I would highly recommend it if you haven't already looked at it to pause now, watch the overview first, because it really helps put into context exactly what we're planning to do with this funding announcement for the Incubator Hubs in context of the whole Blueprint MedTech program and all the other activities going on there. So for these particular Incubator Hubs, our goal is not for you, the applicant to this program, to be developing devices, developing technology. You are facilitating, supporting, providing resources to other innovators who are providing that insight, the new capability, and turning that into a product. So your goal is facilitative to build medical devices as close to the final system, which is to say something that could be a commercializable product, as possible, given the resources, the funding, and support for human-grade prototypes. So I'm going to say it now. I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to sound like a broken record for those of you old enough to remember records. This is a complicated funding announcement. Read it closely. Every word is there for a reason. If it's ambiguous, we mean it to be ambiguous. If it's not clear, well, then contact us. Ask us if you have any questions. As I like to say, we're from the government. We're here to help. So let me tell you about a few things that are not supported by this funding announcement. First of all, clinical trials. Those are supported by other parts of the Blueprint MedTech program. You're not going to evaluate safety and effectiveness or efficacy. We're not supporting technologies that are not regulated by the FDA, such as lifestyle or quantified self technologies. We are also not interested in things that are iterative, basically using existing devices. That's one bound. The other bound at the other extreme is we don't do augmentation of healthy individuals. We also don't support fundamental study devices for research. These are devices to diagnose and or treat disorders of the nervous system that are on a path to commercialization to a product. And the second to last point, generate patentable intellectual property. This is an important one. You, the center, the applicant to NIH, are not intended to generate IP. You are supporting the innovators who have the IP. So the intellectual property comes from these individual projects that you do end up supporting, but not from the center itself. And this last point, foreign institutions, we don't support applicants to NIH directly that are foreign organizations outside the United States. We do support components that are foreign. So if you're a domestic organization and you have a foreign component, a consultant, a subcontractor, that's okay. So as a reminder, ask if you have any questions, read the funding aspect closely. This is very complicated. So you've seen this chart before in the overview. This middle row here are all the individual products that we'll be supporting. The bottom row are the resources. Now, in context of this funding announcement, the giant orange blob on the left is everything that we're supporting through this particular funding announcement, PAR 21314. So those of you that looked at the notice of intent to publish realize that these late stage projects are now included in the Incubator Hubs. What this means is that awardees of this funding announcement will provide design, prototyping, bench testing resources, business development, consultants, industry experts as resources to all of these projects up top, not just early stage and late stage, but also these later stage clinical trials. And you are going to solicit, review, and fund seedlings. These are things that are basically straight out of a lab where they've done a prototype, hand-built perhaps, using a small animal model, and help them build a human-grade prototype. That's these later stage projects where they can have a targeted product profile, where they have a design freeze, and where they will have a prototype that's human-grade, ready for that clinical trial, and ideally as close as possible to what will end up being the marketed product. The items in purple are supported by other parts of the Blueprint MedTech program. In particular, these other resources will also be available to these seedlings and late-stage projects. It's unlikely they're going to need more than just a little bit of clinical advice, not necessarily really clinical trials, because that's not supported by this funding announcement. Here's a bit of a glossary. There's one at the beginning of the funding announcement. Here's another one for reference, just laid out cleanly. Come back to this slide as a reference. A few things to attend to at the bottom here: must and required. We were very, very, very careful about our language in this funding announcement. If it says must or required, you must do it. You are required to do it, or your application will be withdrawn without review, and everyone is sad. These other items may, should, encourage, anticipate, expected. These are things that we would like you to do that will probably lead to a better score and a better chance of being funded, but are not required. And therefore, you can still submit an application that does not meet all of the may, should, encourage, anticipate, and expected items. So I would encourage you to search, use your browser function to search for these keywords and pay attention to what they say. Here's a simplified block diagram of the flow of how individual projects come in and advance through these hubs. You, if you are awarded, will solicit innovators. You will evaluate those proposals. If those look really good and promising, you will solicit whatever resources they need to support. You'll evaluate them. Then you'll put everything together into a giant proposal package to the dollar, everything that is needed to get it from wherever it is today to that human grade prototype that's ready for entry into a clinical trial. And then you'll issue the subawards. So the center itself is structured such as it has 5 required components: outreach core, evaluation core, innovation subprojects, and resource subawards, all managed by the administrative core. We are looking for national leaders, not regional. We're looking for an organization that can handle all of these aspects, manage every part of this, and it must be integrated into a cohesive and coherent effort. We expect you to have the scientific, engineering, clinical, and translational expertise in your application to NIH, and a very broad range of technologies and diseases and indications and disorders. You're also going to be required to coordinate across the Blueprint MedTech consortium. So that's all of the other awardees as part of the program, the things that are not included in this funding announcement. So let's talk about the administrative core. This is for oversight of all the decision-making processes. The PIs are responsible for all decisions and recommendations to NIH, but they're advised by the steering committee. They're responsible for budget, governance, policy, quality, everything about this. The administrative core develops proposal packages based on really promising innovator subprojects proposals, and administer the consultant network, which is to say, not the consultants themselves, but the process of managing the consultants. So timekeeping, keeping track of their disclosure agreement forums, et cetera. The outreach core is the public face of the center and of the Blueprint MedTech program. So the outreach core will basically handle all the content, educational material to encourage people to take that first step out of the lab, give them ideas about what they need to do, engage with them. The outreach core will also manage the solicitations, receive them, process them, handle any inquiries from potential proposers, and do a needs assessment. They're the ones that do the outreach, understand what is missing, what opportunities out there to invest in new capabilities, new technologies, to diagnose and treat these underserved disorders of the nervous system. And to do that, they need to do targeted outreach to solicit proposals from innovators in those areas, but specifically also to do active outreach to people with diverse backgrounds. I'll talk about that later. And the needs assessment needs to be done now, before you submit your application, because that initial needs assessment will inform your draft solicitation that you include in your grant application to NIH. So each innovator subproject that NIH approves and you award, you'll need to help them build relationships, which is industry trade groups, professional societies, potential investors. The outreach core handles that. The outreach core is also responsible for hosting the annual consortium meeting and maintaining collaborations within the consortium with the other parts of the Blueprint MedTech program, including the other Incubator Hubs. So the evaluation core, this is meant to be at least as rigorous, unbiased, and thorough as NIH's peer review, at least meaning more. So they're also focused not on the best science and the best research, but the feasibility of the total life cycle of the proposed project. And it runs through a stage funnel process that I'll talk about in the next slide. But also the evaluation core recruits, trains, and manages the panelists. We want to find panelists with diverse backgrounds, as well as people with diverse expertise. And we may have the evaluation core reevaluate ongoing projects that have issues, may have opportunities to change, and just to keep track of things and make sure that we have that sort of independent view that's rigorous and unbiased and thorough. So the innovation funnel here, the evaluation core is only in charge of these blue bits here, but the concept is you start with a lot of pre-proposals, a lot of people throw in quick and dirty ideas, they get triaged, the good ones get invited to submit full proposals, then the really good ones get invited to a deep dive, that's an interactive back and forth, and then NIH approves projects for award, and then those get awarded. So there's this funnel down from a lot to a little over the course of the process. And walking through the steps, so the outreach core will do outreach, find people to propose, and leave it open to anyone. They'll have that solicitation, the managed solicitation process, and potential proposals will submit pre-proposals. Those will get triaged by the evaluation core. And those recommendations will be taken to the steering committee. They'll take those recommendations to the PI. The PI will take those recommendations to NIH. So NIH gets final authority on what gets invited to submit a full proposal. Then the proposers come back with full proposals. Those are reviewed by the evaluation core for viability. Is this going to work? The total life cycle, not just the immediate next step. Those recommendations again go to the steering committee, the PIs, and NIH. Then the lucky few that really have a clear shot on target, those go to deep dive. Like I said, a back and forth interactive engagement between the evaluation core and the potential proposers. It's a bespoke panel that supports the review of that one specific proposal. Those then go to the administrative core, the ones that look really promising. They build a proposal package around it of all the resources that are needed, the milestones, the structure. That gets forwarded to NIH. We bring it to our leadership. And this is where the money comes in. NIH will provide funding for the projects that we find most meritorious and we have the available funding for, and then submit the money back to you, the Incubator Hubs, and you issue subawards, both to the innovators and whatever resources they need. Now, the Innovator Subprojects core, that's the next step. They manage these subprojects, administrative and project management. You got to keep them to the timelines, the milestones, deliverables. You coordinate with the resources and work with the outreach core to develop partnerships. We don't know what these are going to look like. We don't know how mature they are. Some of them might be just ready to go, just need one little extra shove. Some are fresh out of the lab. They have no clue what they need to do next, but are really promising. That's why we have such a wide range here. And you may manage up to 15 projects at a time. So this Innovator Subprojects core is pretty broad and open-ended at present. And same goes for the resource core, which I'll talk about in a moment. And reminder, these projects will only get to the Innovator Subprojects core after they've been through a deep dive and approved by NIH. They will have comprehensive supporting data. Like I said, it may still be a hand-built device in a lab environment, but still it's compelling. And these groups may not have prior experience. So they're going to need a lot of mentoring, a lot of hand-holding in the translation process, in maturation, in the boring non-research aspects of getting a product from a demonstration to a product. And some of them may not even be ready for that. So they'll come in as seedlings, just sort of advisory without actually doing any building or developing of technology. At the end, if they're successful coming out of these incubator hubs, they will have a human-grade prototype ready for entry into the companion funding announcements, which is to say they're ready to file their IDE if they need one, or ready for their IRB for non-significant risk projects. So they'll have a design freeze as close as possible to a commercial product, and they'll have detailed plans on how this thing will work. The regulatory plan, the manufacturing plan, a manufacturer lined up, reimbursement, marketing, even how it'll be disposed of when it's done. Everything will be ready at this point to advance by the time they're done with the Innovator Subprojects core. So the Resource Subawards core, as I mentioned, these are complementary. There may be more than one per Innovator Subproject. So this first one here has 2 associated resources. This one has 4. Don't know. It depends on the project and what their needs are. And the potential resources that the Incubator Hubs will offer are in green, and the ones that are in gray will be provided by other parts of the Blueprint MedTech program. So you only need to worry about the green ones and be able to harness those capabilities for applicants. Not everyone is going to need every one of these items, but some of them may need every single one. So back to one of the earlier things that I mentioned is the musts. So I've just summarized some of the important musts here. You must have all of the cores in your application to NIH. You must plan to ramp up and describe exactly how you'll do that. You must have biosketches for all the steering committee members in hand. You need letters of support from your institutional officials. This is more important for an academic institution where translation isn't necessarily the heart of what the institution does. We want to know that your institution is going to stand behind you and provide you everything you need. For a small business or other entity, this may just not be terribly important, but you still have to provide it. You also need to provide a conflict of interest policy and a confidentiality policy. You must also include a plan for how you're going to reach those people with diverse backgrounds. And cumulatively, all of the PIs need to commit 2 calendar months per year of effort at a minimum. Some other requireds are the draft solicitation. It must be shovel ready. We want to see this thing that if you get your award, you're ready to post it almost immediately. And you need to back that up with a needs assessment that justifies what goes into that solicitation. These other items are optional attachments, and the agreements between you and potential consultants, innovators, resource providers, et cetera. Please use these exact titles. This is what will end up in the grant application when you attach these files. Benchmarks are not the same as milestones. These are the benchmarks whereby we, NIH, will monitor the progress of each of the incubator hubs and keep track of their successes. The individual resource and innovator projects will have milestones they need to hit particular goals of deliverables. So we actually encourage you to talk about your potential benchmarks with us before you submit your application. So please find our email address at the end of this presentation and send us a note. We expect them to be quantitative. So one of the recommendations here is how many proposals were received. So quantitative is we expect to receive over 50 proposals each time. Quantifiable is we expect to receive a lot of proposals, and we'll tell you how many that we're going to get each year at the end of the year when we report. Qualitative is we expect to receive a lot of proposals. We want quantitative, hard numbers, expected to. These benchmarks will be negotiated before award. Whatever you put into your grant application and whatever peer reviewers look at and recommend changes to, and whatever program staff and leadership want, we will negotiate with you before we issue any awards. We're going to monitor these over the life of the award, and funding to your award might be discontinued if you do not meet your benchmarks. I'll let that sink in for a moment. Okay, so here's some examples. These are not the required ones. These are just ideas. Please go ahead and propose your own potential benchmarks, things that you can be evaluated by across the whole spectrum of what the center does. So budget, yay. This part's a little bit complicated because of the fact that you need to submit in your grant application to NIH whatever requested funds you need in order to do full-scale operation, which is to say up to 15 innovator subprojects and the resource subawards that go with them, all of the outreach activities, all of the evaluation activities, and all the administrative core activities. So it's at up to $15 million. That's the upper limit. So you need to propose what you need, what you think you need in order to do all of these activities up to but not exceeding $15 million direct cost. But you should only expect to initially receive funding to cover your basic operations because you haven't solicited, evaluated, and received funding for the innovator subprojects and the resources that go with them. So the base cost that you will receive initially is going to be substantially lower than the amount that you could receive if you provide to us proposal packages for some really exciting innovator subprojects. So everything will be scaled back in the outreach core, everything will be scaled back in the evaluation core. And because you haven't submitted any innovator subprojects, proposal packages, no funding for those activities. After you do submit those to NIH and after they're approved and after we provide funding, then those will be turned on and everything will be scaled up as you go. So this all comes about because we can negotiate our budgets downward, but if you request too small of a budget to cover the full expenses of everything that needs to be done, we cannot give you more money than you ever asked for. And you do need to justify what these anticipated needs are, how to calculate this, how to get to the total amount that you're going to apply for. But since we don't know at the time of application, just guesstimate how much would it cost to do all of these activities, this base level of activity, and then extrapolate and describe how things scale up with each additional effort. And just as a reminder, the cost for consultant labor does not belong in the administrative core. The administrative core is only for the management of the consultant network. Each individual consultant their budget belongs in the relevant core's budget. So another unfortunate fact, I'm sorry, I apologize, but this is a multi-component funding announcement, which means you need to submit all of these components, all 6 components, 5 cores and overall, and each one is effectively its own separate grant application. I'm sorry, but you got to do it. Some parts of each of these components are either boilerplate, copy paste, don't worry about it, but you need to fill in everything that it asks you to fill in. You see these asterisks here? The electronic system in Assist will allow you to submit up to 6 pages, but if you do submit 4, 5, or 6 pages to the Innovator Subprojects core, Resource Subawards core, your application will be withdrawn without review. Keep it to 3, please. I also encourage everyone to look at the application review section of the funding announcement. No, I know you're not reviewers for this. You're not doing peer review for NIH, you're applying. However, the better you understand what the peer reviewers are looking for, the better you can understand how your project will be scored and its likelihood of being funded. So please look at this section, read the review criteria, and think about it from that perspective of what will the NIH peer reviewers think of your grant application. Please also look at the terms and conditions. This is a cooperative agreement. As I mentioned before, funding may be discontinued if you do not meet your benchmarks. So please look at this. Please understand what you will be signing on to, the terms and conditions. It's broken into 4 easy sections. Please also note the prior approval section. Innovator subprojects and resource subprojects will be prior approval. So you don't start them until we say you can start them. Likewise for delayed onset studies, because all the animal subjects and human subjects research will be defined by whatever the subprojects are that come in, that you evaluate, that we support through proposal packages. We don't know what those are yet. Those are delayed onset, meaning you cannot define them at the time of submitting your grant application to NIH. Once you define them, you need to submit them to NIH. We need to review them, and we need to unrestrict your ability to do those human subjects and animal studies. Those are prior approval. And we will remind you at all times that you can't start humans or animals until we say it's allowable. Now, I mentioned it earlier, I'm going to bring it up again, diversity. We want to support traditionally underrepresented individuals in the workforce. And we want you to provide a plan to solicit from them. We want you to encourage, recruit evaluators with diverse backgrounds. We want your steering committee members to have diverse perspectives, and describe holistically how enhancing diversity will be supported throughout your whole center. It's an important thing here. Don't drop the ball. And I'm sure you have questions, and we'll field questions in our live webinars. But for those pre-recorded frequently asked questions, yes, you need to fill in all those details for each component in Assist. Sorry. Foreign components are allowed, foreign institutions are not. So domestic applicants to NIH can have foreign subawardees and individuals and consultants. You need to have a breadth in order to support the interests of the participating institutes and centers in this Blueprint MedTech program. Here's the link, follow it, read up on what our our colleagues in the other institutes and centers are willing to support, because they're the ones with the money that will support the Innovator subprojects and the resources they need. We also want breadth across geographical regions, indications, patient populations. Steering committee, Innovator subprojects and resource subawards. They should primarily be from outside your institute and the organizations you're submitting your grant application to NIH from. This is not meant to support just one regional hub. You are facilitating the national dialogue and the national capability. We may consider projects that come in from your organizations, but ideally we want most to come from outside. I'm sorry, we did really good about keeping care of our language and keeping our terminology separate. However, NIH has something called a resource sharing plan. That does not mean that the resource subawards are shared outside the Blueprint MedTech Consortium. It's an unfortunate twist of language. That's just the way we ended up. Don't worry about it. You don't need to share your resources outside of Blueprint MedTech. You're going to ask me, how many hubs are we going to fund? And I'm going to tell you, I don't know. Next, how much should you propose for? I'm not going to tell you that either. You have to justify it, no more than $15 million. If you missed the letter of intent date, don't let that set you back. You can still submit a grant application to NIH for this funding announcement, but please reach out to us. Please let us know. The whole point of the letter of intent is so that our peer reviewers can be prepared. We can set up a panel and figure out who's in conflict and how many applications we expect to receive. That's the point of the letter of intent. It is not a binding letter. Next, we do expect delayed onset, non-GLP, animal use, and human use. However, most of that human use, we expect it to be exempt sort of user preference studies, not evaluation of safety effectiveness. So we'll have additional facts on our Blueprint MedTech site. So please go there, check, look for the updates. As I said before, and I'm going to repeat it again, this is a very complicated funding announcement. Read it closely and ask if you have questions. There are links embedded in the PDF version of this document. Applications are due. This date may update by the time the webinar posts. The intent is October 20th. Reviewed over the winter, go to our advisory council in May, and awarded very shortly thereafter. So please contact us. Please check our FAQ. And please let us know if you have any questions. And just one final note, the funding announcement that's posted on NIH's website, that is the definitive document. Everything I've said here is complimentary, supportive. If I disagree with what's in that document, the document is right. So if you have any questions, please contact us. Here's our email address. Thank you.